Always make sure that you're establishing your relationships. You're always saying to people, what can I do for you? And never burn a bridge, no matter, even if people are wrong. Wrong things have happened to me. It doesn't matter.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups and 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. And if you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, and we are always here to help. Now, today we have another great guest on the podcast, Trevor Thompson. And to give you a quick introduction to Trevor, so started his entrepreneurial journey at a young age. I think worked for, might have been in high school, college, and you'll have to correct me where I'm wrong. Worked for Ripley's, believe it or not, for a period of time, and then moved over to Guinness World Records and did that and worked with those businesses. Started up a couple side businesses that work along with the Guinness Book of World Records. Bought and sold a few stores. Tried it out on his own a few times. I think also did a flower store for a period of time. Did a haunted house. Did a grand opening, and then it didn't go as well as you'd wanted, and retooled, and then got recruited over to iFly, helped build up that business. iFly sold to investors, wanted to do something else, and that's kind of where it brings you back to where you're at today. So hopefully with that much is a mostly accurate, or hopefully all accurate introduction, welcome on the podcast, Trevor.
Yeah, no, it was pretty good. I definitely have one of the most unique backgrounds of anybody.
Well, all right. Well, let's go ahead and dive into it and chat a little bit about your journey. So I gave kind of that brief, quick run through of it, but let's take a bit back in time into when you were a young entrepreneur and just getting started on your journey.
Yeah, I started actually, I didn't even go way back. I mean, at age 8, I had 3 paper routes and 5 lawns that I cut. So I was always very entrepreneurial. My dad was a minister at the church, and I actually used to pay people to take or they would pay me to take their slot to cut the church lawn. And I was always very ambitious, and at the young age of 13 got my first job, and that was with Ripley's, believe it or not, up in Niagara Falls, Canada. And that was the start of me learning about real business and what it took to do it. And
you say you were 13 at the time?
I was 13 years old.
So just out of curiosity, what did you do at Ripley's, believe it or not, at 13 years old?
So I started out, this is really funny story, actually. They put me out in the street corner to hand out brochures and to promote the business. So young me, I ran out in the street corner, and the first person said, "How much is it?" And I went, nobody told me. So I ran back in and said, "How much is it?" And I went out and they said, "Well, how much is it for kids?" And oh man, nobody told me. So I ran back in. So very early on, I realized that training for new hires anywhere I've been was not very good. So I spent a lot of time. I actually bought their guidebook with my own money and sat in the maintenance room and read it on my lunch break so I would know more about Robert Ripley. Just from a very early age, I wanted to do well. I wanted to learn, and unfortunately, I saw a lot of defects in businesses, which when you're 13 or 14 or 15, they just think you're a smart aleck. But I was really trying hard to do a good job. It was important to me.
So now one question, now it's a complete aside, nothing to do with your journey, but now that you raise it, I am curious, what's the 30-second way that Ripley's, believe it or not, got started, given that you know his background?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. So he just decided to publish this book, and it was Believe It or Not. So they started in the publishing business of books, and then it just from there it grew, and then they started having the museums, and then they had the TV show, and it was and it's obviously it's grown into be a very big brand.
Sure.
And the idea of it was believe it or not. So nothing was actually completely factual, but they presented it as if it was factual.
Interesting. I had no idea. So there you go. I learned something. If nothing else, I learned something new today. So now you did Ripley's, believe it or not, and then I think you from there transitioned over to Guinness Book of World Records.
That's correct. Yeah. So they used my boss actually from Ripley's moving down the street and opening up a Guinness World of Records, which is the opposite. Guinness is about proving it's true and setting a record. They have pretty strict guidelines. And to be honest, when it first happened, I wasn't planning to continue into the hospitality field. And then actually, the first time in all of my life, the only time in all my life, I was fired from Ripley's. It was very, again, it was a manager that I knew more than they did. And one thing I didn't know was how to bite my tongue and just be a good team player. So I definitely learned that lesson and walked down the street and said, hey, I'd like a job. And they said, when can you start? And I said, I haven't had a weekend off in about 5 years, which is pretty strange for someone who's 18 years old to say, can I start Monday? And they said, that's fine. And quickly grew within that. I started as a shift supervisor, a couple of months, went to assistant manager, and then the general manager within a couple of years. And then to make me feel important, they gave me a title of vice president, which was a little bit more control over the business. And it was a very interesting business. And then the parent company of Guinness came along, and they'd actually rebought the rights out from someone they'd sold it to, and they needed somebody to represent them in North America. So they'd offered me a full-time job. I didn't quite like all the parameters of it, but agreed for them to hire me part-time and convince the ownership that I worked with that, hey, listen, I'm making you a lot of money. I'm doing a good job. You don't have enough to keep me to the level I want to go. And they were very agreeable and said, I could take this side gig as long as it didn't interfere with the numbers. About 40% of my pay was bonus related, the way it was structured. So they had a pretty good hook to keep me behaving and making them money. And so I actually was running one in the Empire State Building in New York City. And then we sold a couple of franchises in North America. And how I started my next journey is I was actually trying to open my own location of Guinness World Records. I started in Branson, Missouri, ended up trying to do it in Orlando, Florida. But coincidentally enough, Ripley's bought the rights back to Guinness, or bought the rights to Guinness and wouldn't give me the franchise, which is how all of a sudden I ended in the haunted house business. So I was 18 years with Guinness, and I managed their rights for a while. I had a consulting company that did some other work. I actually sold a franchise in Hollywood, California, and I actually opened up a wax museum. They own the Hollywood Wax Museum, and I opened up a Hollywood Wax Museum for them in Branson, Missouri, and spent a couple of years basically being their representative as the owners. And then now they're quite a big company, and they've got about 4 or 5 throughout the United States. They've grown to be quite a big company. And so I moved to Orlando, Florida, and all things opened a haunted house.
So now one question, because when between the haunted house, I think there was a flower store between those two. Is that right?
So the flower store was pretty early on. So traveling in the US, I noticed everybody had flowers at 7-Elevens and convenience stores. So I thought, man, we really need to get this business in Canada going. So I started up with a friend who owned a flower shop, and typical startup business, we were underfunded. So basically it was a home equity loan. And then eventually I cashed in all my retirement to try to keep it afloat and going. And our first contract was for 7 locations. Our next one was for 21 locations. And our next contract was for 830 locations. And within 18 months, we were up to 1,900 locations. And our biggest vendor, that was 1,300 of those locations, went bankrupt. And 6 months later, paid us 10 cents on the dollar. And being underfunded, we couldn't survive that. And it ended up going bankrupt, and got pretty messy for a little while there.
No, and that's always hard, and that may be your biggest business mistake. We'll have to wait or see if there's another one or if that's the one. But it's always hard when you have, kind of a bit of all your eggs in one basket, or a lot of your eggs in one basket. In that sense, then you're saying, if the one business goes under, it can make it really hard to stay afloat, and when you kind of tag to that. So although I always wondered, as another complete aside, if you're not supposed to have all your eggs in one basket, then are you supposed to have like one egg in each basket, carry around a whole bunch of baskets? So someday I'll have to figure out the origin of that saying, but it holds true to form. So you did the flower shop for a period of time. Now, one question, the going from Ripley's, believe it or not, to Guinness Book of World Records, that's kind of seems like a natural transition. They're kind of in the same industry, but when you get into the flower, and then we'll talk a little bit about the haunted house, and at least those ones kind of all, but it was a flower shop. It seems like a fairly different industry. So So what made you say, oh, I'm going to go from, Ripley's, believe it or not, Guinness Book of Worlds to Flower Shop? How did
You
you
know,
decide on a flower shop? I mean,
yeah,
I get you touched on it, but maybe give us a little bit of an idea there.
yeah. I mean, it was strange. I was traveled a lot in the U.S. For some of the things that I did, and I always saw these flowers at the stores. And flowers, I don't know if anybody knows, but they got a massive markup. So like you can buy a rose for 25 cents and sell it for 2.99. So
Hmm.
it's a pretty big, massive markup. So I had a friend who owned a flower shop. So I just talked to him and we started a company 50-50. And our plan was to put these fresh cut flowers into convenience stores, and try to capitalize on year round. And then the big one was to capitalize on holidays. We After we started the business, we found out something very unique. So they passed a law stopping everybody at street corners from selling flowers. So they were everywhere. And they actually passed a law, and we found a way around the law that what we did was we were representatives of the location. So the
Mhm.
location, 7-Eleven, could put flowers outside, but I couldn't put flowers outside. So we would sell the flowers to 7-Eleven for basically their cut plus 10% on top of it. And we had corner store, selling flowers. One point I had my entire house. I lived in a 2,300 square foot house, and just about every square inch had mums in it for Mother's Day. Just because we had no warehouses to store it. It was really hilarious, the things you do to try to be creative, think out of the box. And we could make as much money on a Mother's Day as we could 6 months just in the store locations.
That's interesting. No, so now you do that flowers and do the flower business. I like how you figured out a way around it, and it probably gave you a competitive advantage because most people can't or weren't able to do that. And so you do that for a period of time, and then it sounds like the business as a big distributor kind of or the big client went down. You kind of went down with them. So
Yeah.
how did you decide? Okay, now I've done flowers for a while. I'm gonna in one sense you're bringing people joy and making them happy, and now I'm gonna go scare the living daylights out of them. How did you get into the haunted house business?
Yeah, so it was interesting. So when I was first started to look in Branson, Missouri, just because I had connections there, to put some business there, and that didn't work, but found a bunch of people that wanted to invest in Florida, in Orlando. And the landlord that I negotiated the land lease with, he had another vacant piece of property. And he kept saying, I really want to get into this entertainment business. What would you put here? And we just sort of brainstormed, and at one point we said, we would put a haunted house in there.
Hmm.
And and he went, that's a great idea. So we drew it up. If anybody's ever been to Orlando years ago and they saw a big haunted castle called Skull Kingdom, we used to shoot big propane blasts off the roof like 30 feet in the air trying to get attention. You could see it from I-4. We thought we really knew what we were doing, but unfortunately, we didn't quite know what we were doing. So grand opening day, the flow of the attraction didn't work, and we actually had to shut down during our grand opening.
Hmm.
Might have known better to do it on Friday the 13th at 13:13 hours when we opened.
Hmm.
So, and we actually brought in Kane Harder from Friday the 13th, the actual actor. Brought him in for the event, tried to really do it up big, but unfortunately it was pretty embarrassing that it didn't work. But
Hmm.
within a week we were open again, and unfortunately that business struggled. But as a land deal, my partner, he ended up making some pretty good money on the land he owned. So we managed to tear it down and sell the land.
Hmm. No, that makes sense. And hey, if the land is becomes more valuable than the business, you're saying it doesn't make sense to keep the business open
Yeah.
anymore, and so you shut it down. So is that but it sounds like it would have been an awesome one. That would have been cool to see all the big propane and the fire and the Friday the 13th and doing all of that. So now as you're kind of shutting down that one and saying, okay, we learned some lessons, we had some success, and now we're having to retool things. How did you then get into kind of I think what was iFly and starting to work
Yeah.
there
So
do that for a period of time?
Yeah, so one big lesson here is all of your life just goes in circles. So SkyVenture was originally called, and they rebranded to iFly. They were
Mm.
looking for somebody that knew about attractions. So we own the indoor skydiving, plus they own the world's tallest sky coaster. which he invented in Kissimmee, Florida. And they were looking for somebody who could run multiple attractions. And oddly enough, they hired a headhunter recruiter, and he started calling around, and he reached somebody who worked at Ripley's Believe It or Not, who I'd actually reached out to saying, hey, things aren't working out so good. Do you think I could get a job back with you guys? And their answer is really funny, that I was too entrepreneurial to fit in their corporate structure.
Interesting.
But they referred me to the headhunter. So even though it wasn't the right fit at the right time with the right company, they referred me to the headhunter. I interviewed, managed to get the job. And, I was 20 and a half years with Fly Under Skydiving. We grew from the one location in Orlando, Florida to 80 locations. And I would probably still be there doing what I want to do, but it's a very high touch activity in a small space, and not very COVID friendly, even though it's very safe. In people's mind, it's just not something they want to be doing. And so they had to retool themselves and decided that they needed to cut back until things go back a little more to normal.
Well, no, and I definitely get that. And that one is a hard thing that a lot of businesses are hitting is, we got all of these things that are hitting us, and how do we retool and how do we adjust? And if not a lot of people are going out or doing anything with us, how do we adjust to that? So, definitely makes sense, the cause of the transition there. So now you're saying, okay, we've done, worked with iFly, was there along the ride, building it up, building the business, it continued to retool. And then I think you got a bit into kind of real estate and passive investing, or working with others, passive investing.
Yeah, so I'd always been interested in real estate. And oddly enough, the original owner of iFly, when I first started, he gave all the team members Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And I read it, I believed it, but I was so busy when I'm going to refer living someone else's dreams. They were my dreams too. We were building the company, that I didn't think about investing in the real estate yet. So it was, in the back of my mind, I always wanted to do it. And then about at year 16, we got bought out by a private equity company. So it released some cash. I was able to get some cash out of the business for doing that. And I decided to start passively investing. And my goal was always to be an active real estate investor. I just wasn't sure the what. And so I started the passive. And then when it happened, and that dreadful day where I got the phone call, and I could see it coming. And, I loved everybody I worked with. I love the company. I still love them. I'm still friends with all of them. And, I understand business is business. And so I decided that I needed to give now doing my real estate investing a full-time shot. It's still a little rough coming out of COVID. They just extended the eviction moratoriums again. So, but I'm not giving up. And my goal is to be a multifamily apartment syndicator. So I've passively invested in 9 deals, and I'm looking for my first active deal right now.
Oh, cool. Well, sounds like certainly a wide journey in a lot of different places, and now are going to go and follow in the footsteps of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So I love it. So
Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up, I always have 2 questions at the end of each podcast. So we'll go ahead and jump to those now. So the first question I always ask is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made, and what did you learn from it?
So the worst business decision would have been getting into the flower business. And then when we got in trouble, I stuck my head in the sand instead of really trying to figure out where we were. I think I could have done a better job of figuring it out ahead of time. And then by the time I figured out where we were, it was too big of a mess, and there was no stopping it from having to file for bankruptcy. Again, not our fault, but maybe I would have slowed down the expansion. You sort of get caught up. And we had a lot of, in one company, we had a lot. And it was even hurting us to keep up with what they wanted us to do. So sometimes, just being a little more cautious, I might have learned something.
No, and that definitely makes sense. And it's easy to sometimes stick your head in the sand, sometimes saying, oh, it's worked this way forever. Why change? Or, oh, it's just going to take a little more time or a little more money, or we just need a little bit of luck. And sometimes that's true. And it just takes a little bit more perseverance. But sometimes you stick your head in the sand and you're not willing to see where things are at and where they're headed. And it can be detrimental to the business. So I definitely kind of, you have to be careful on both sides of that. So now jump into the second question I always ask, which is if you're talking to somebody that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what'd be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
So the one piece of advice that I would give everybody is that you need to be sure that relationships are the most important thing that you have in any of your business. If you think through my little path, right? Ripley's followed my manager to Guinness. I had a good relationship with my owners, and they were actually the people I was working for were my partners. They actually agreed to be in a partnership with me to go do the Guinness. When I went bankrupt, I came to the company and explained what had happened to me. Oddly enough, they own an accounting firm. They became my trustee, and they really looked out for me. One of my best friends who I had a relationship with, he called me up and said, hey, whatever you need, because you're going to lose, I was going to lose my half of the house, not my wife's, because in Canada they could take it. And, all these people stepped up. And then even with the Ripleys, they said I was too entrepreneurial, and I could have said, you guys are ridiculous. But at the end of the day, they referred me to my next, right? So it's always make sure that you're establishing your relationships. You're always saying to people, what can I do for you? And never burn a bridge, no matter, even if people are wrong. Wrong things have happened to me. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, establish those relationships, because you never ever know when it's going to come back, and it's going to be the thing that saves you. And I mean, getting an iFly saved me. And somebody who I could have said, you guys are jerks for not hiring me, and I didn't. I thanked them for their time and said, if things change, give me a call. And I'm still friends actually with that guy. 27 years later, we probably talk like once a year. It's not a big thing, but just make sure you really nurture your relationships with people, and ask first what you can do for them, not what they can do for you.
No, and I like in that of the takeaway. I always think that, there's always a part of, I think, almost everybody that, it just really feel good to tell them off and to burn that bridge and just, make your statement. And, sometimes you slip and you do it because, it's hard to always bite your tongue. But I think absolutely to the degree you can, it's never worthwhile to burn the bridge. Even if they did it, they were in the wrong, if they did something wrong, if you didn't do anything wrong, or you just walk around and they were an absolute jerk to you, anything else, because you never know where relationships go. You never know what's going to happen. And the person that, they may have been in the wrong, they may realize it later on, or you may cross paths, and you never know how it's going to happen. And a burned bridge, is very hard to ever overcome. And then if you're always a bigger person and don't burn that bridge, no matter what the circumstances, it provides a lot better opportunities a lot of times. So I like that as a takeaway.
Yeah. If you've ever read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about filling up your emotional bank account. Gets filled up one drip at a time. And then when you kick the bucket over, it's all gone.
Yep. No, I definitely agree with that. So, well, as we wrap up, if people want to reach out to you, they want to know or learn more about all your various careers, they want to be a investor along with you with their real estate, they want to pitch you with a new idea, they want to learn more about iFly, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out, contact you, or find out more?
LinkedIn is the best, just because it's easy. Just connect with me on LinkedIn. It's just Trevor Thompson. You'll see me there. It says real estate investor, passionate entrepreneur, and 10x learner. So just reach out on me there. Just tell me you heard me here. And happy to talk to anybody.
Well, I definitely encourage everybody to reach out. There's a wealth of knowledge, a lot of opportunities, and it's definitely someone to keep in contact with. Well, thank you again. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure, and I appreciate having you on. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to come on the podcast and share your journey, feel free to go to inventiveguest.com and apply to be on the show. Also, a couple more things as listeners. One, click subscribe in your podcast player so you know when all of our awesome episodes come out. And two, leave us a review so new people can find out about us as well. Last but not least, if you ever need help with patents, trademarks, or anything else, just go to strategymeeting.com. We're always here to help. Thanks again, Trevor, and I wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Awesome. Thanks, Devin. It was nice to meet you. Good luck.
Absolutely.